Okay, guys, I promised we were going to do this. Let's do it. Let's take the earliest look, the way too early look at Breeders' Cup Friday, the Future Stars Friday. David, I know this is a category that you follow in particular all year long. You have a lot of acumen in various areas of handicapping and horse playing, but none more so, in my opinion, than when it comes to looking at 2-year-olds. We'll start with a very basic one. Which 2-year-old race are you most looking forward to checking out?
Without a doubt, the Juvenile, because it feels like you've got 4 really talented horses that have won the major prep races, 2 out in California for Bob Baffert, and then 2 that are more East Coast based or in Kentucky, Locked and Timberlake. And I'm just really intrigued to see how these 4 horses stack up against each other, because they're similar on speed figures. You could like each one for different reasons heading into the race. And it's just the matchup among these 4 that I'm most interested in seeing on Friday.
I get it. I mean, right now, how are you leaning towards splitting them? Does one aspect stand out above the others, or is it really just a scrum you're going to separate as we get closer to the day?
I would say I'm probably most skeptical of Prince of Monaco, just skipping the prep, and he's just got a pedigree that leans a little bit more towards sprinting and looks a little bit that way to me. I was surprised by how well Muth ran in the American Pharoah, not just that he won the race, but he really handled the distance better than I thought he was going to. So, I mean, just given the home court advantage that they have, I think they're going to be tough, but I do like Locked and Timberlake a little bit more. I just feel like we've seen them handle different kinds of adversity. Timberlake in the hopeful, running so well after getting rank early in the race and then handling the sloppy track last time in the Champagne. He feels like one that is going to get better with distance to me. I feel like we know that about Locked already, having handled the 2 turns in the Breeders' Futurity, and that was a legitimate effort after the wide trip that he got. We'll see if the Santa Anita track suits him as well, because sometimes it can be a little speed favoring, and we'll see if Bob Baffert's able to sort of control this race on the front end, since both of his horses do have speed. But I'm leaning a little bit more towards Locked, and especially Timberlake. I really think he's got a lot of talent.
JK, let's bring you back in, because we've talked about this race a lot in different videos and shows already, and we've had some more data come in since the last conversation we had, at least on our YouTube channel. So I'm very curious to know, how are you separating these top contenders right now? Do you still believe this could be a Baffert benefit, or like David, are you thinking maybe the East Coast can get involved?
No, I mean, I think I'm going to probably, I mean, I think if they were loading in the gate right now and it was getting close, I would probably use Timberlake and Prince of Monaco. I'm frustrated that Prince of Monaco didn't run in that prep. It's not necessarily like a negative to me, because like it's kind of Baffert's thing, right? I mean, he won the Classic in American Pharoah, training them up to the race. I don't think that's too much of a concern for me. I mean, but the reason I don't like it is I wanted to find out which race was real for Prince of Monaco from a figure standpoint, 2 back or the last race. And now I have to guess again on Breeders' Cup Friday, which is a little frustrating because I'd rather just know. But Timberlake is kind of who I thought he was. Disappointing that he didn't run better and the hopeful. He had a trouble trip in there, but then he kind of showed up last time in the Champagne and showed me who he really. He's best horse field, but those other 3 are pretty damn good. But I think that the way you make money in that race is not by using all 4 of them. It's by narrowing it to 2 or 1 and letting the other 2 or 3 beat you.
We'll have that conversation closer to the time. David, need to bring you in for potentially a reality check here from me, because I basically hurt my finger. I have carpal tunnel from texting different friends in the UK, telling them to bet over and over for me when Tamara was 2-1 in the juvenile fillies. That price is gone. Is this a 1-horse race? I mean, I keep trying to convince myself that it is, but having made those bets, I'm a little bit biased. What do you think of Tamara's chances realistically in the juvenile fillies?
I mean, I guess you could frame it in a way that she has the same questions to answer that Prince of Monaco does, because same thing, they've elected to skip the final prep and just try the 2 turns in the Breeders' Cup. I think you probably justifiably have a little more confidence that Tamara's not going to have a problem with it, given her pedigree and just the way in which she won the Del Mar debutante, like added ground was arguably going to be her friend. And also just given the competition out there, I mean, nothing against the horses that ran in the Alcibiades. I thought that was a decent prep race. And Candide is a horse that does have upside still. She's been a little goofy in her races, hanging on her left lead, even when winning that last race. But it feels like they all have to take a step forward to get on Tamara's level. And just given the general lack of depth in this division compared to the 2-year-old males, she probably even has some room for a slight regression and could still win this race. So she's way the horse to beat. But I mean, it's the kind of situation where the assumption that she's going to handle the distance is built into the price, and she hasn't proven it yet. So there could be a potential underlay on her.
Interesting. We'll talk more about Tamara and what price you think she might be. But JK, I know we're on a tight clock with you for this video. And now that David has taken the wind out of my sails, I'm wondering if you might put some back.
Well, here's the problem, right? When it comes to these 2-year-old races, and you see it all the time. You see it with like the kind of the flashy, this fastest horse in the world, first time starter, which I'm sure David loves those horses when he's making his morning line. But what I'll say is that the thing that makes these races so interesting is 2 things can happen. One is that can be true that Tamara is without a doubt the best in her group, and it appears that that's the case. But there's also the other possibility that the other horses who have only run 1, 2, or 3 times could figure it out and turn up and run big, fast races. And that's the problem. That's the question, is which one of those situations is going to happen. I'm leaning towards the fact that Tamara is who we think she is, and that she's going to be extremely tough to beat. And she's going to take another step forward. Obviously, if she draws the rail and misses the break, she can get beat. But there's just not another horse in there that's giving me like the kind of warm and fuzzies of I can come up with a story as to why they're going to take a 20-point speed figure jump forward. I can see Tamara running 10 points.
All right, JK, we know you've got stuff to do. We're going to boot you out. We're going to continue this conversation with David. JK, we'll talk to you on probably the early week show next week, but we'll see you very soon. David, let's turn our attention. Actually, let's go back to Tamara for 1 second.
See you
Cheers,
later,
buddy. Go back to Tamara for 1 second, just in terms of, obviously when you're not making a line at this exact stage, but you do have a line associated in the early look at the race on DRF. What price are you calling Tamara on there right now? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, the fields aren't set yet, so I'm being conservative with my lines right now. I have her currently at 7-5. I think when I use all the points in the race, and I do a final line when the race is drawn next week, or the pre-entries come out, I mean, she's going to be odds on in all likelihood. It's just given how the field shakes up and her just her perceived dominance of the division. So I think you have to decide how likely she really is to win the race. I mean, like JK was saying, you might not project that one of these horses is going to take a huge speed figure step forward, but you could also frame it a different way and say that, okay, I believe Tamara is 75% to win the race. But if she's 1-5, then 75% is not good enough. So you might want to find an alternative in that situation.
Makes me feel good to say you think she'll be odds on. That was part of my logic in continuing to bet those numbers that we were seeing. One of the other races on Future Stars Friday, obviously much harder without having the exact idea of who's coming over, etc., how they're going to acclimate. But do you have any other thoughts on these races where we're going to get some European participation?
Yeah, I mean, the turf races are always a little bit in flux until we find out exactly who is coming. I mean, we've heard some rumblings that Aidan O'Brien might send a few horses. Obviously, it would be very exciting if he sends that Group 1 winner from ARC Weekend, the filly, whose name is escaping me now. Opera Singer, yes. She'd obviously be kind of a similar situation to Meditate last year, a really tough horse to beat. Waiting for confirmation on that. The Juvenile male turf race seems very wide open, not just among the Americans, waiting to hear who's coming over from Europe. The winners of the prep races have all earned sort of similarly mediocre speed figures, and also a lot of horses that are coming from off the pace to win these races. So it's going to be interesting to see how the pace shakes up, but also how that running style translates to a Santa Anita turf course that can sometimes be a little more speed favoring than a track like Keeneland with that longer stretch. So I'll be interested to see how all of that works. And then, the turf sprint, we've got this European horse, Big Evs, who's been talked about potentially coming over. He's looked really good to me, but 5 furlongs on the turf at Santa Anita, Euro has to be really fast to be successful in that situation.
I was going to ask how you are generally evaluating Euros having to do this super sharp flat 5. I certainly don't see it as a positive, but I'm also not going to necessarily be throwing them out out of hand in the juvenile turf sprint or the sprint itself. How do you try to figure out which ones might be able to handle that unusual configuration for them?
Yeah, it's just really horse specific. I watched the replays from Europe to not just see how fast they're going in the early stages of the race, but really their gate speed. And one horse that really kind of sticks out that has been talked about quite a bit since he ran at Keeneland is Livin' the Dream, who's supposed to run in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint on Saturday. And one thing that you could really see watching his replays for that Woodford was that he just busts out of the gate a length or two ahead of the other horses. Sometimes that's because in Europe they generally break more slowly on average than over here. But there was the thought that maybe he did have the gate speed to compete against the American horses. And I think he proved in that race, despite finishing 4th or 5th, that he really does. And the turn back to 5 furlongs at Santa Anita might actually really benefit a horse like him. But he's sort of an atypical European contender in that he just naturally has that gate speed. They don't usually train for that overseas. So a lot of those runners can be somewhat up against it.
I'm interested in him a little. I know we're talking about Friday and we're now pivoting to Saturday briefly. I'm a little bit interested in him as one who might get forgotten and seen, couldn't hack it at Keeneland. But I think he hit on a couple of key points. The difference in the course, that half a furlong back. Current prices, probably not. About 6-1, I think, internationally. But that's a horse that could be double digits in the end, and one that I think is worth keeping an eye on. Going back to the juvenile turf sprint before we wrap up this part of the conversation, David, anybody in particular on the USA side that's caught your eye for that one so far?
I mean, George Weaver's got a strong hand. I'm really interested to see, as long as Crimson Advocate makes it to the gate, it sounds like they're still pointing for that race off the long layoff, how she does, because she was so impressive early in the year, not just winning at Royal Ascot, but if you go back and watch that race that she won at Gulfstream, I mean, she was just really took to the turf that day impressively. Sometimes that early season form doesn't translate to the end of the season, and her having been off for so long, there are a lot of questions surrounding her, but George Weaver's got some other good ones amidst waves, Nene Nets. Just it feels like there's a lot of speed signed on, but sometimes going the 5 furlong distance, that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to look for a closer, because those races typically don't totally fall apart the way they do at 5.5 or 6 furlongs. So you need to find the horse that can strike the right balance.
The speed of the speed. We talk about it so often. Well, David, thank you so much for your thoughts on Future Stars Friday.